welcome back to the Ink Sink. I am Annie.
I'm Kaylee.
And this is the publishing podcast for the rest of us.
Hell yeah, it is.
We are the rest of us.
One and the other. Technically correct.
This publishing podcast is just for us, actually.
Just for us, but also the rest of you too, I guess.
Yeah, right. You guys can listen if you want to.
No, but really, no. This is, we just want to be very inclusive, and we're very happy to have everyone that participates in our podcast, whether you listen or you read the transcripts, or you just click through and you're like, hey, I know them, because you're our moms, and you just have it on in the background muted or whatever. We really appreciate you, and we support you, and also thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that heartfelt message comes in front of something that I think is going to be a little bit difficult for some of us to listen to at the moment.
Yeah. So amidst the many, cool new things that are coming out, there's a less cool new thing, which is, of course, the new Harry Potter. Which, I don't know if you guys are aware, but obviously the main cast has been pretty unequivocal about their distaste for J.K. Rowling's opinions on trans people. And so we're going to, again, bring back one of our episodes on problematic authors and how to engage or disengage or whatever, however is safe for you, and how you can kind of approach that for yourself.
While keeping in mind your mental health.
Exactly.
And that's a point that we're going to make in this episode. So for those who don't know, HBO Max recently announced that they are creating a new Harry Potter show. We don't have any details. We know that J.K. Rowling will be heavily involved, and because of J.K. Rowling's comments on trans people, some people, including us, I think are feeling a little bit iffy about whether or not we would even want to watch that show. And so we recorded an episode about that a while ago, and that is the one that we're going to play for you today. We kind of make the point that, it's a luxury to be able to say, I don't want to engage with this. It's good to honor your feelings, absolutely, but sometimes, if your comfort space is problematic, get to a good spot, and then don't feel guilty about your comfort being your comfort. As long as you are safe where you are, please, please, please make sure to engage with yourself first, because ultimately that's the only thing we can do or should do with art.
We'll give you tips on how to enjoy the things that you loved in your childhood without giving any fresh money to people you hate.
Yeah, we'll have tips for you.
That seem to hate you, potentially.
Exactly. We'll have some fresh tips for you, so enjoy. We are prompted into this by some recent tweets, but also some kind of think pieces that have been going around. If you're active on Reddit, there's been another round of discussion on whether or not we should be reading H.P. Lovecraft lately. Orson Scott Card has not been in the news, but that's one that we've talked about on the podcast before. Dr. Seuss, Chanel, we can go into all of them really if we wanted to, but basically today we could go into the history of the new critics and separating the arts from the artist in general, but we think we're going to actually set that aside for now because that's a very large topic in and of itself, and instead of going into the history of it, we kind of just want to talk about the topic itself.
The idea behind it and what it means and how we should approach art in general. Yeah.
And then, in a secondary way, what are our obligations as consumers? So, do you want to get us started, Kaylee?
So, I don't know if we published this episode, or if it was one of the hidden reels, our secret scrolls. But we talked previously about Orson Scott Card.
We did.
And I think that might be just maybe a jump-off point.
Sure.
So, if anybody doesn't know, he is not a good dude. He's racist, homophobic,
extremely homophobic,
extraordinarily homophobic.
I went seeking out some of his quotes just so that I could clarify for myself what kind of person he was, and finding his homophobic statements was really disheartening for me, especially because Ender's Game, I don't know if you felt the same, but Ender's Game was, in my opinion, a story about people being people no matter how different they are from you.
Yeah.
And he apparently does not, I guess, practice what he preaches, and that was really sad to me. I think also because I had just discovered Ender's Game at the time, and Ender's Shadow, and falling in love with those characters and that story and that message, and being very, very, very sad. But yeah, so that was like a thing, and I think you and I knew each other at that point. We might have talked about it then and said, and you were like, well, yeah, as the elder statesman to my budding nerd at the time, you were like, well, so what we do is we don't buy directly new content from Orson Scott Card.
Don't give them money.
You don't give them money.
Yeah, I mean, and it's kind of, we may be jumping ahead into kind of what should you do, but like I just think that the whole discussion of art and its stance as either separate or integrated with the artist and the person that created it, its creator. How do you think about it? Well, how you think about it informs what you're going to do. And so like there's so many ways to kind of approach this, because it's not like this is a new issue. Like historically there's always been shitty people, and sometimes those shitty people were artists. So they were writers or painters or musicians. Wagner was a vehement anti-Semite, and you can find some of that in like has influenced his work in ways that, you know, you could still point to. It just wasn't as prevalent, or at least it wasn't as critically considered as bad at the time. Like, what is the idea of separating art from the artist? Just generally speaking, I'm not going to get into the history, but what does that mean? Well, the movement defined that initially when it came to be in the 20th century as art should be able to stand on its own. The creator is dead, essentially. That's the idea. And that's obviously crap. Unfortunately, look at Frida Kahlo and look at Nina Simone. Their art comes directly from their personal experiences and their desire to draw attention to and incite feeling and provoke sentiment and thought about their struggles. That's just the way it is. And so, and across the entirety of human history, that's why art is created. The question then becomes, well, what about when the artist is not a good person, and how do you consume at that point?
Piggybacking off of that, just because I think that's a really good point about Frida Kahlo and Nina Simone. And I would even throw in, there are some pieces by Picasso in there. And this may be apocryphal, but there's the story that I always remember about Picasso, where he was famous in his lifetime and he was renowned and he sold well in his lifetime. And he would go out into like a restaurant and for whatever reason not want to pay the bill or not be able to pay the bill or whatever it was. And so instead of, you know, being like not going out, he would instead draw something on the back of the check. And so the restaurant would never cash that check, or they would never turn that receipt in, because they now have a piece of priceless Picasso art. And if you go and look that art up, it's like not awesome. It's crap. And it is only because it's Picasso that it is even preserved in any way. And in my opinion, that art cannot be separated from the artist. But I think there is a scale, and maybe you can tell me if you disagree with me. I always think of Georgia O'Keeffe's Iris series. I don't know if you know who Georgia O'Keeffe is, and her Iris macro images. If you don't know, it's fine. You can look her up. She's one of like the preeminent female artists of the 20th century. She had a series of paintings that were macro shots of flowers, like really zoomed in on the interior of a flower. And they are, if I may, quite erotic. We don't need to go deeply into all the parts of an anatomy that might be showing. But apparently Georgia O'Keeffe was like, that's not what that is. It's just a flower. I don't know what you're talking about. Y'all have dirty minds. But in my opinion, like when I look at that, it is evoking that feeling for me. Mm-hmm. Even though the artist and I disagree, I think that art stands on its own as something beyond the art, beyond the artist.
So I think that that's when you figure, like, I don't think that you can fully separate the art from the artist, but I also likewise do not think you can separate the consumer from the art and the message that is drawn from, okay, I just want to be very clear, Annie and I have different thoughts on poetry, but I am a poet, or at least I that's my like seminal like,
and you know it,
introduction to literary criticism and analysis. I wrote a lot of poetry throughout much of my life. I've not telling anybody where, but I've been published, and poetry, especially above anything else, is the likeliest of the literature to be easily separated from the artist, just because of its more sparse or spare nature in many circumstances, especially in modern poetry. And so it definitely stands opposed to the artist in many cases. It's not just poetry, but that's just what informed my burgeoning thoughts on this matter when it initially kind of erupted in my own brain a long time ago as more and more things come out. Speaking of Picasso and being kind of not a great person. And then just that concept moving forward into people that are still alive today and, you know, celebrities and artists that we have more access to their private lives and understanding, well, maybe they're not great people, etc. And how we kind of engage with that. You can't separate the art from the artist, but the person that is involved in the consumption also has a say.
That's a good way to say that. You can't separate the art from the artist, but the person consuming it also has a say.
Yeah, and sometimes it's the people that are specifically harmed. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
I'm trying to think. So Tippi Herndon is an actress, and she was in, like, The Birds, and she... Yeah. So speaking of just movies, Alfred Hitchcock...
Also not a great person.
Not a great person. Very good director. Excellent director. Kind of a shitbag. And specifically probably assaulted many, many women.
And a fuckhead.
Yeah. And he was called out by one of the actresses in The Birds, Tippi Herndon. And she has said, I, didn't like the man, but I recognized his value I appreciated him for what he was. Like, specifically. So it's not just that, like, I'm not saying the consumer, when they are not harmed, has a say. I'm saying that everybody involved in the consumption, including anybody that may have been harmed, has a say in what this ultimately means. And in many cases, victims or people that have been a part of marginalized groups that are victimized by artists or people that moving in circles they shouldn't, potentially in leveraging tools that they shouldn't use to hurt people, they have the say too, and they can sometimes, and they spitefully might take it back.
Absolutely.
So then it comes to, well, how do you handle the idea when, like, the artist is still alive versus, like, Picasso? It doesn't matter if a Picasso painting sells for millions of dollars today. That fucker is dead.
Yeah, same thing with, this came up with Chanel recently. I think one of her, like, original pieces sold. Coco Chanel, for those of you who don't know, was a Nazi. When the Nazis invaded Paris, she supported them and was flipping on people all over Paris the whole time, like, actively a Nazi, actively helping the Nazi party. But Coco Chanel, crucially, is dead. And so you are not supporting a Nazi by buying anything Chanel. The people of the Chanel house have worked very, very hard to make sure that all of those ties are gone. And if you buy Chanel, you are in fact supporting them, not Coco Chanel herself, who is, again, deceased.
Yes.
Like H.P. Lovecraft, also ardent Nazi, also dead.
Yes.
And it's one thing we can sit here and we're talking about, not supporting Orson Scott Card because Orson Scott Card is still alive.
Yep.
So when Orson Scott Card dies, we happily buy reprints.
Assuming that his estate is not supporting the same,
yes.
Which, to be fair, probably not, but you never know, and requires
same thing
a
with
little bit of consumption.
Dr. Seuss's estate has done really well with not righting the wrongs necessarily, but being very open about
discussing it, addressing it, doing their best.
And addressing it and taking things off the market when they realize that they are extremely racist, and being open about, like, hey, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, it was wrong. We plan on making these reparations in the future, and we're not going to publish this anymore.
Yep.
For those of you who maybe weren't paying attention within the past few years,
they pulled some of their books,
right? Which actually weren't in wide print anyway, but they had some extremely racist depictions of Asian characters, and so they were being pulled, and that I feel makes sense.
Yep.
Even if you don't think that Dr. Seuss as a human being was worthy of your patronage as a consumer, Dr. Seuss is dead. And you are not giving him patronage as a consumer.
Yeah. So that's kind of the easiest approach and the easiest part of this topic to answer.
Is do we care about dead people? And the answer is no.
We do not. Grief and art and everything is used. If it's looked at in a vacuum, i.e. nobody is consuming it, nobody's watching it, then it's nothing. It's about the human condition. It's a mirror. If nobody is looking into the mirror, then it's just dust.
Yeah.
It's formulated dust. It's got a chemical structure.
I need you to get your poetry shit out of here, because that was really beautiful.
Thank you. But yeah, so Annie, what are your thoughts on contemporary art and consuming when the artist is alive? Because we've talked about J.K. Rowling before.
We have, and
she was a seminal part of both of our childhoods.
Agreed, yes. And I don't want to rehash all of the things that she said.
We all know. We've been done know, guys. You know. If you don't know, Google is your friend. We're not gonna...
The logic... I will just say that the logic that she uses to back up her assertions doesn't actually...
It is not logic.
...hold water until she can give me a situation where anything that she is accusing people of having done actually happened. Then we can talk about it. But nothing that she is afraid of has happened, so...
And not only that, it's just like... This is just,
I don't know how else to put it.
Yeah, not only that, guys, it's just... Again, I think I said this earlier, there are always, have been, and always will be bad people.
Yes.
Some of those bad people happen to be X, Y, or Z.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's a matter of statistics. At some point, an industry or a thing that you are invested in is going to have a shitty person.
Yeah.
As potentially someone very impactful or important in that industry. There's been several hundred, I should say, I'm sorry, increasingly more public discussions of the civil rights movement and how the male African-American figures were absolute shitheads to the female African-American figures in those movements. I mean, and not all of them, but
of course not.
Many very popular figures. Gandhi, specifically, we've talked about that. I don't know if that was on a published episode.
My guess is no.
Probably not. So Gandhi, not a great person. He was a great like cultural figure to rally around for his movement and as far as his country went, but he was shitty to his wife.
Mm-hmm.
Very much so. Not a great dude to women. Well, how do you deal with that when you're living it instead of looking back historically?
Exactly. I want to give a quick shout out to the Journal of Popular Music Studies. Their issue recently had an essay from Robin James talking about the way that artists have subverted racist and patriarchal movements in their mediums. Because this is another thing. I do want to be clear here. Kaylee and I don't believe that a couple nerds sitting in Maryland are going to cure all the ills of the world by giving you advice on separating the art from the artist. And, you know, this is something that I don't know if we've said it on the podcast before, but it is a truism. There is no ethical consumption in capitalism.
Absolutely not.
Anything that we do is going to have a downside. It's really up to us to simply find the lesser of two evils, to educate ourselves, to be good citizens, to vote with our dollars.
To try to find a way to continue to improve.
Exactly. To have a positive impact. And that is important to us.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that Robin James acknowledges in her piece, which I felt like she did it in a really, really incredible way, saying almost all art these days is heavily, heavily influenced by the patriarchy, especially the white patriarchy, especially the white cishet male patriarchy. Like, there's nothing that we can do to get around that. And rejecting all of that altogether is lovely in theory, but
it's impossible.
Almost impossible. It sort of like all of us going to live as hermits and not talking to each other anymore.
Right. With the nature of humanity as a species, we don't pop out fully formed.
No, we don't.
And so that's the idea behind, can you separate art from the artist? Well, no. In my opinion, you can't. And you shouldn't, for the better and for the worse. But then should you cancel art or an artist in general when their person is proven to be maybe less good than we would prefer, or maybe morally repugnant on some level or in some aspect. And the answer there is, well, everybody has always been informed by their culture, and that's just since the dawn of time, and people are not perfect. Yeah. So where do you draw the line?
And I also want to give a shout out to the journal Studies in American Humor. Philip Dean had a similar article in that one in the past few years talking about, well, theirs was specifically talking about Bill Cosby. And I do just want to make sure that we bring that up because, especially when we're talking about JKR and Bill Cosby, their opinions are JKR's opinion is objectively wrong. Bill Cosby's actions are objectively wrong. We're not gonna sit here and say, that it's shades of gray or anything like that. No. Especially because J.K. Rowling's platform is heavily influenced by her art, and as human beings who were a part of her platform back in the day.
So disappointing.
We, I think, have the right to be disappointed. Yep. I think it's important that we bring that up before we kind of go into how we vote with our dollars.
Yeah, and that's the thing we've already kind of established. The best thing that you can do is to not... To reduce the amount of power that you give to the person. You could take back whatever meaning you want from it, 100%. But like I was talking to Alex, he didn't know about Orson Scott Card, my boyfriend. He was like, "Oh yeah, I was really excited to read this." I was like, "You can read it, baby. Just go to a secondhand bookstore."
We do not recommend pirating.
We don't recommend
this podcast.
Don't do that. Go to a secondhand bookstore. Order through the used section of Amazon.com, like the buy from other people section. Mm-hmm. Do not give these people money. Like, for example, there's the video game that's coming out. The Harry Potter MMO looked so cool, and then this all came out, and they're doing their best as part of the game to separate themselves from J.K. Rowling, but I just want to be very clear. Any proceeds from this game currently...
because she owns the characters in the story, so she is licensing those and getting money from that.
Goes to her. And so you can't... Like, I'm not going to buy it. I love IP. I'm a big nerd. I like nostalgia. Like, I'm a big fan. Yeah. I would have been all about it. Yeah. But... I can't do it. I can't.
Especially when it's causing real harm. Like, again, that's one thing when we're talking about, like, people who are alive today, like J.K. Rowling is actively
causing harm.
Actively lobbying the UK government to block trans women from getting access to healthcare. That is a genuine, concrete harm that she is doing in the world. And because she has money and a platform, these legislation movements are more likely to get passed because of her support. And that's horrible. So what can you do? I mean, we've said get things secondhand. Another thing, like, is wait. I mean, I don't know about you, Kaylee. I haven't been to the movie theater in a long time, and I feel like a lot of us are now getting a crash course and just waiting for something to come to streaming. And you can apply that to pretty much anything. I mean, eventually something's going to come up for sale for $1 on Steam. You can get your, you know what I mean?
As again, give that person as minimal, if not zero, $0 or views or clicks or whatever is their revenue stream. Because again, it could be, we were talking about clickbait earlier. That's a thing in modern society. Yeah. Traffic is sometimes the coin of the day that kind of really, drives a person's power base. Just don't indulge in it to the best of your ability. And if you want something, like if you're interested in, for me, like a game or something, go back and, like, if I'm interested in playing a Harry Potter game until I can find a way that makes me comfortable engaging with, like, the new MMO, if I ever do. There are many wizard-based MMOs. There are Harry Potter Lego games that are, like, less shitty that I already own. Destroying something that I already have does nothing to injure or in some way take back power from J.K. Rowling. Like, she's got my money from the books that I purchased when I was a kid, and
we can't reverse that.
Yeah, like, you can't, and it's tragic and shitty and awful, how she's choosing to use her platform and her power. And all we can do is approach things and educate people, like, more intelligently.
Yeah, and that's something that both Robin James and Philip Dean talk about in their essays, is make sure to face it head on. Like, it might be uncomfortable, but make sure that you are going in with clear, open eyes for what you are maybe not supporting, but maybe boycotting. Like, if you are like, oh, I just don't have the mental capacity to look at this right now. I mean, don't put yourself in a situation that's going to hurt you, but make sure that you know what you are boycotting, or you know what you are choosing to ignore today. And don't feel like you need to be boycotting everything from JKR ever. This was a really good quote from Robin James's essay, if I can read it to you. The fetishization of revolution devalues and ignores the existing practices of care that oppressed people have performed, often for centuries, to survive and thrive within unjust institutions. Such practices look for available resources to build and inhabit the worlds one crafts in one's quotidian relations with other people. Thinking with Audre Lorde, Macaria argues that sharing joy builds and sustains worlds, creating everyday pleasures, especially the joy of pleasures shared with others. It's a way oppressed people carve out smaller, habitable worlds in a universe whose current structure requires their physical, social, and/or civil death. These everyday pleasures are a lot easier to accomplish than, say, fixing sexism. We can do them now, while we work on that bigger, longer-term fix. Through the sharing of these everyday pleasures, like the pleasures of listening to a favorite song, we build and sustain an aesthetic dimension that is less oppressive and more fulfilling than the real world. If Harry Potter is your comfort space, then it's your comfort space. If you are a trans person struggling with the fact that Harry Potter is your comfort space, it's still your comfort space.
And don't
ever let J.K. Rowling take that from you.
because we already talked about this. We don't want to give her a stronger platform, but like you have a say in how art speaks to you.
Yes.
So
Absolutely.
don't let her take that away from you either.
And if you're someone who has unlimited dollars, one thing that came up as an option for...
As so many of us do.
Which, yeah, if you have the money to spread around, feel free to. One person said that it would be really helpful if you really feel that you must see, you know, whatever the latest Fantastic Beasts movie is opening weekend, if you must go to Harry Potter World, which, you know, whomst amongst us doesn't love that. Maybe also... in addition to fronting that ticket price, you take a look at some trans protections or trans rights or trans charities in your area that are working to help trans youth, specifically trans women, because for some reason J.K. Rowling hates them with a fiery passion. And maybe you can maybe not mitigate some of the harm that J.K. Rowling is doing, but at least make sure that the people in your community know that your safe space does not preclude their safe space.
100% agreed. Speaking of J.K. Rowling in Harry Potter World, it's not like she was like when she was signing the contract with Universal that they made a massive multi-million-dollar construction on that she was going to be like massive transphobe. I guarantee that never came up in her negotiations with Universal Studios. What are they supposed to do now? You know, it's not like they can just lift out these two parks. So 100% support the people that are being harmed however you can do it. Absolutely. That's always, and they're deserving of it no matter what.
Yes, absolutely. And I want to make sure that we say trans women are women.
Trans women are women. I just want to be very clear. I don't want to be like trying to talk about it, not trying to tap dance around it. She's wrong. J.K. Rowling is wrong.
Trans people are people. Trans women specifically are women.
100%.
And I don't know a better way to say, like, I again hope that we can say in very, very strong terms that at least the Ink Sink is a safe space for everyone, no matter their gender, no matter their orientation.
100% want to be. 100%. Like, and if there's any thoughts or feedback that you want to give us,
absolutely,
we invite it. Please do. We want to learn and we want to be better if there's anything that we should be better on.
And if I can make a recommendation of Fansplaining, the podcast about fandom, they talk about trans characters in fandom and trans headcanons in fandom, and they have a lot of people who write in to talk about their experiences and their kind of coming to the realizations that they are trans through fan fiction and having those experiences and how powerful it was for them. And of course, Harry Potter is mentioned.
Of course.
In there. Shout out to them. I recommend their episode for that if you want more on this content. Thank you so much for listening. You can find our Linktree wherever you found this podcast.
And you have a fresh new way to support us. You can donate or subscribe through our new Ko-fi, where you can buy us a coffee. We had to look that up several times to make sure we were pronouncing it correctly, but
it's really not intuitive.
It is not, no.
It's ko-fi.com and then /InkSync podcast, but you don't have to remember that. It's on our Linktree, which is wherever you found this podcast.
You can just use the tip jar. It goes there.
Yes, anything you want to do. You can see on our Ko-fi page that we do have costs for the podcast, about $40 a year, and you can help us cover those costs, or you can just buy us a coffee because you like us, and I like us, and we like coffee, and that's cool.
Speaking of absolutely nothing to do with anything that we're talking about later, I'm unpacking at my new house, so I've been looking up ways to avoid that for things that I'm doing in the future. Moles. We have a mole potential issue in our yard.
Like a spy or a rodent?
I'm pretty sure he's like Perry the Platypus and that he's both.
Okay, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, because he's got a little hat. A platypus. Perry the Platypus! Sorry. Good old
No,
Dookie.
you're not.
I'm not. That's true. She's right. She saw me laughing and smiling. She knows me. So I looked up, and apparently moles detest coffee.
Really?
So you can use your old coffee grounds. You like basically
as like mole repellent?
Yeah, they hate the smell of coffee. So you like put the old coffee grounds in the holes, and eventually they'll be driven out of it, and then you can like just water your lawn with water that's been cycled through the coffee grounds like once a month as just like an anti-mole talisman.
Wow, but does it work on spies?
I'm pretty sure it may draw spies closer. So, you win some, you lose some.
Sure. Well, but if this mole is also a spy.
Mm-hmm. So Marvin the mole. I don't know. You're right. I gotta think this through some more.
I think you do. And in the meantime, buy us a coffee to keep the moles away from Kaylee's house.
Yeah, guys, I need your help. Only you can help prevent mole infestations.
We'll see you next time.